Live from Washington, D.C., this is Transport Topics Newsmakers, the digital interview series that gives you access to candid conversations between industry experts and a veteran reporter. Sponsored by CatScale.
Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the latest edition of Newsmakers from Transport Topics. I'm Seth Clevenger, TT's Managing Editor of Features and Multimedia, and I'll be your host for the next half hour or so. In this program, we are very pleased to present another in-depth conversation with a leading figure in the trucking and logistics industry. Today, we're going to be discussing truck parking, along with several other important industry issues, with Lisa Mullings, President and CEO of NATSO. This edition of TT Newsmakers is sponsored by CatScale, which operates a network of more than 2,000 truck scale locations across the U.S. and Canada. Before we get to a conversation with Lisa, I'd like to share the following message from CatScale.
Time is money, and CatScale can help your drivers save time weighing. Real-time locked PDF copies of scale tickets are sent via email. Fleet transactions are available for download, and CatScale weights are always guaranteed. Drivers get back on the road faster with the Weigh My Truck app from CatScale.
Now, I'm very excited to bring in Lisa Mullings, President and CEO of NATSO, the trade association representing the nation's truck stops and travel centers. Lisa, who has led NATSO for 25 years, is here with us today to discuss truck parking, safety-related initiatives, and more, including a recent ride-along with a professional truck driver. Lisa, welcome back to TT Newsmakers. It's great to have you back on the program.
Hi, Seth. It's great to be here.
And Lisa, as I mentioned at the top, it's a really great timing for this interview because you just recently completed this 5-day, 1,500-mile ride-along with Jennifer Evans. She's a professional driver at Werner Enterprises. And that really sounds like a unique opportunity to see life on the road as she experiences it. Of course, many of us have been on ride-alongs, usually for maybe an hour, right? But this is the full experience. So just maybe just start with the takeaways, right? Describe that experience. What did you really come away with from that experience?
It really exceeded my expectations. I want to say how grateful I am to Jennifer and to Werner for giving me the opportunity to see life from the passenger seat of a big truck. I have never spent overnight in a truck before, and I stayed overnight with Jennifer and with her 85-pound dog. And it was just fantastic. But it definitely was an eye-opening experience, and I learned a lot. Even though you hear things, of course, because I've been in the industry a long time, seeing it for myself was kind of a revelation, I think. The job definitely is not easy, but Jennifer absolutely loves it.
Yeah, it was great. And, we hear so much about all the workforce issues and the struggles that trucking companies have to recruit and retrain truck drivers. And of course, when you look at the demographics, the biggest opportunity to expand the workforce is to bring more women into the industry. And an example of how yes, it's a smaller segment of the driver population today, but if that can expand, that can potentially help address some of that issue. And of course, a big piece of this program today is focused on truck parking. So, of course, I have to ask about Jennifer's experiences, right, during this 5-day long ride along. What were her experiences locating parking, during that 5-day span, right? Of course, in addition to parking at the end of your shift, drivers also need to find parking for their mandated rest breaks to comply with hours of service rules. So, multiple times throughout the day, drivers need to find a good, safe place to park. Where did she end up parking, and did she encounter any parking related challenges during the course of the week?
We were able to find safe legal parking within her legal duty hours every evening and during the day for the rest breaks. That wasn't an issue. And she told me that she never parks illegally. Yeah. But I do think there are issues related to parking. She mentioned, for one, that she avoids places that require what's called blindside backing, which I wasn't aware of before, but it's when drivers need to rely solely on their right side mirrors. And although few of the truck stops have that kind, she said that one had been redone recently, and now she avoids it. And as we drove by it, I could see that it had plenty of spaces, even though it was, in the evening. So that was something that I noticed. you know, I haven't been shy over the years about saying that I don't see truck parking as anything more than a cost of doing business for trucking companies, uh, just like, taking care of the truck in other ways, such as maintenance. Truck stops were once able to include the cost of building and maintaining truck parking lots in the cost of their fuel, but that's no longer true.
Right.
For many years now, fleets have negotiated fuel prices with truck stops, and that price doesn't leave much room sometimes for truck stops to invest in free parking, and so I think that's the disconnect there.
Yeah.
But I do think Jennifer and I did have to leave parking lots twice while we were on the road because there weren't enough spaces in those particular lots. But we did find parking within, the allotted time. We noticed that there were a lot of drivers who were parked illegally, even when there were spaces at truck stops. When we would drive 5 miles or so down the road, and there were spaces at that lot, but there were still drivers parked nearby illegally,
Yeah.
which we didn't know how to account for.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. And that is, we all see, of course, trucks parked on the side of exit ramps and things like that. When they're just looking for a place to park, or maybe just cutting it too close on hours of service. But I'm going to shift back to your ride along experience here in just a little bit. But uh, those are some of the struggles, of course, that truck drivers sometimes encounter when they're trying to find a safe place to park. Right? I mean, there are um, apps now and other sources of information to help drivers understand where parking is available, and also determine, hey, this location, maybe this will be full by the time I arrive, so maybe I should come up with another plan. So there is more information. There's technology now, but how much opportunity still remains to improve utilization of the truck parking capacity that exists today? Right. We
Yeah.
have all these spaces, we have these lots, we have these truck stops. Um, how much opportunity is there to improve utilization?
I think there is some opportunity. One evening when we entered a lot that was full, we were driving through the lot and I noticed how many bobtails were taking up full size truck parking spaces. And I asked Jennifer about that, and she said that, she thinks because of a lot of e-commerce now, some drivers who are making local deliveries, they make those deliveries during the day in nearby urban areas, but at the end of the day, they park their bobtail at a truck stop and then they just drive home. And she
Oh,
was frustrated that, so many of those bobtails are utilizing a full space when in fact they could park, two in one space.
yeah,
Um, and that's an issue. And I asked her why they weren't, parking elsewhere, like at a warehouse or the terminal, and she said that, some of the drivers just are not permitted to do that. So, and the other thing, of course, that's, been a few years now, but is the ELD mandate, of course, that made a huge impact on truck parking because, before drivers could more effectively stagger their times, but now it appears more and more of them are just, parking at the same time every evening. And so all of the truck parking capacity is being used up at the same time. It's almost like, we've talked about a stadium being full only on a Sunday during football season, and the rest of the week it's free. It's open, and it's much like that with some of the parking lots. They're all being utilized at the same time.
yeah. Or going to the beach during what middle of summer versus in the spring or the fall, right?
Yes,
It's a different
exactly.
experience based on the time and also location, of course. So brings me to my next question. Of course, the availability of truck parking varies from market to market.
Yeah.
Depends on the time of day. But in general, from your vantage point, Lisa, where do you see the biggest parking crunches and cases where demand outpaces the space available, or certain key areas that you think that there is more of a problem than elsewhere?
I think, it's going to be no surprise to anyone that outside big urban areas, near ports, uh, in areas where there's a lot of population, but sometimes it can even happen, in areas where there isn't a huge population problem because of local opposition, and that's something our members have to deal with all the time. If you say you're putting in a convenience store, it's not as much of an issue, to get zoning approval and support from the local community. However, if you are putting in a travel center or a truck stop, there's a lot of negative stereotypes associated in some people's minds. And they want the products and everything that is delivered, but they don't always want to support the drivers, and the industry, in having a place to fuel and park and eat and rest. So that's one of our members' biggest challenges, is
Mhm.
trying to get that approval and support from the community. There was a case, that um, and this happens all throughout, the US all the time, but there was a case where we heard that somebody said that truck drivers are stealing children off of bicycles, and in their opposition to having a truck stop in a community where there were very few people. I think only 40 houses in this area, but those people banded together to try to prevent this, and they succeeded.
Yeah, no, it's there's always that sort of NIMBY effect. Not my backyard, but everybody relies on trucks. If you
That's
go to the
right.
store and you have the products are on the shelves, there's a truck that brought it there, so it's something we all rely on. And yeah, unfortunately, there's some of those negative stereotypes that are still out there, that aren't based in reality. Uh, but but thank you for sharing that. I think that's a piece of the conversation that the whole industry needs to have, right, with the public at large. And it's one of the values of kind of elevating the profile and the image of the industry. So there are fewer cases like this, that you described. But this whole truck parking issue, right? I mean, sometimes when I talk to truck drivers, you hear it as something that can be a frustration,
Mhm.
but it's not simply a matter of convenience for drivers. I mean, this is clearly something that is both a safety issue and a productivity issue. Drivers need to have access to ample parking. Um, Cases like I described earlier, driver parking their 18-wheeler in unsafe locations, right? Highway exit ramps or side streets. And of course, this hurts industry productivity, combined with hours of service limitations. I mean, a driver may decide to stop early and uh, maybe just leave a lot of available driving time on the table if the safety and supply chain efficiency challenges that are connected to truck parking. And how can motor carriers and truck stop operators work together to help mitigate something that is often a pain point for drivers, at least in certain markets and areas?
I do think that, trucking companies that are now really good at logistics, and, they do indicate to their drivers, of course, where they can fuel and where they can get maintenance done on the truck, and repair work. I think that really the easiest and best solution to this is to have the fleets work with the truck stops in building more parking, just, making that part of the negotiation process, because you never find that there's a shortage of diesel fuel out there, and it's because there's a return on that investment. There has to be a return on the truck parking investment as well. And most of our members don't charge for parking, but that is changing, especially with regard to reserved spaces. So drivers can get on, for many of our chains, certainly, and go in and reserve a space ahead of time. So planning ahead and knowing where they are going to stop. That is not always very easy to do. Jennifer and I were on the road, and we did get stuck in traffic. There were like two accidents on the road. And so it took us an extra hour and a half,
Yeah.
almost 2 hours, to get to where we were going. So that is very challenging. I think that in order to increase the capacity of parking out there in any meaningful way, the fleets need to look at this as a productivity issue and a safety issue, and say, you know what, truck parking is enough of an issue for me that I'm going to make sure that, my truck and my driver are parked safely at night. And in order to do that, I'm going to negotiate with the chains and the independents and all the other organizations that are out there now, providing fuel discounts to make sure that they also are providing parking for my truck. Um, I I do think it's important to work with government because not only at the local level but the state and federal level as well. Um, this is an issue where I think some of our um, states and localities, when they are permitting a certain place, to come in and build, a truck stop, they need to also look at how much parking utilization is going to be available for that driver who is coming in to see that, to visit that truck stop, or warehousing and other things that are in the area. What is being done to make sure that the driver has a safe place to park? And NATO has been involved with the Department of Transportation for many years in looking at truck parking issues. And we've also worked on the Hill on, various laws that have been approved and are on the books now to get more parking out there. Um, so that's something that we will continue to support. But I do think that the fastest, easiest way for us to get more parking is for the trucking fleets to make it an issue with the truck stops.
Yeah, and one of the models that you described there, the opportunity now to pay to reserve a parking space is something that we've seen in relatively recent times.
Mhm.
Last several years is caught on a bit. That does seem to be something that is in a way to address some of the uncertainty, right? If especially you consider uh, accidents and delays, just the stuff that happens in the course of transportation, right? The unexpected will happen, but uh, if you can reserve a spot and your driver has a place to park, so they can plan their trip, not to worry about that, where they're parking at the end of the day. There's clearly some value in that. Um, and then, of course, the question is who is and who isn't willing to pay to reserve a parking space. But Lisa, to what extent do you see paid parking catching on moving forward? And do you see that paid parking model really becoming commonplace, if not the norm, in the future?
I'm not at all sure. I think that I have seen more and more paid parking, but it's still such a small percentage of the total parking out there. Um, we did pay to park one evening because I wanted to stay at a specific truck parking area, or a truck stop rather, so that I could visit with the owner. So I paid for the parking for Jennifer, but we didn't pay to park the rest of the time we were there, and we were able to find spaces very easily.
Yeah.
So I don't know what how that's going to grow in the future. I do think that more and more of these reserve spaces, though, are clearly going to be coming online because we see that that continues to grow. When new facilities are being added, that feature is being added as well.
Okay. We've talked about improving utilization at
Mhm.
existing truck parking locations. Of course, as we've already mentioned, there's also efforts to expand capacity by building or opening up more parking locations that are suitable for heavy duty trucks. So, from your perspective, Lisa, is truck parking a utilization issue? Is it a capacity issue? Is it both?
I think it's definitely both, and I think there's so many different issues that go into this. It's a complicated matter because, even when the federal government has gotten involved in it, they've gotten involved in it with states. You know, Often it comes down to a local zoning issue, and that's really, really hard when you consider how many localities are out there. It's really difficult, to sort of work on this issue without considering that all of these local communities have their own opinion about trucks and truck stops and whether there should be parking in their area. But there is a lot of reason to continue to work on the problem and solving the problem, because we need drivers to be safe. We need products to get from point A to point B in an efficient manner. And, trucking companies want to make sure that their drivers are safe. They want to make sure that their trucks are being utilized in the most effective way possible. And, the time that is spent, looking for parking that's been reported, I think all of that could be solved in a much easier way if we could just all sit down together and figure out how to make it work. But I do think that, Jennifer, she knows where the safe places are to park. And a lot of the drivers, they have their regular routes. I think that when you look at long haul drivers that aren't familiar with an area, they certainly need more support, I think, from their dispatchers,
Yeah.
to help them find parking places.
Yeah, a regular route, truckload, over the road. Sometimes, independent owner operators, maybe going to a new area that they're not super familiar with. That's where it becomes tougher, for sure.
Yeah, and one of the things that I noticed is, when ATRI does their survey every year of the top issues that trucking is facing, there is kind of a disconnect between what the drivers say and what the companies are saying in terms of parking. It's rated, really high on the issues that are of concern to the truck drivers, but much, much lower on the list of concerns for companies. And I just wonder why that is.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it is an issue I think that has been elevating across the board. But yeah, I think the driving force behind that for sure is truck drivers on the front lines who um, maybe in the market they're in or routes they're running or times they're operating run into some challenges.
Mhm.
And it's certainly an issue, pain point for the drivers out there. And of course, is something, if it's a pain point for the drivers, it also needs to be a top priority for the fleet operators as well.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
Getting to I think the capacity side of this a little bit.
Mhm.
Of course, we always follow what's happening in terms of legislation, funding for truck parking related initiatives, and we've seen some government investment in recent years. Of course, the bipartisan infrastructure law allocated some funds to build new truck parking spaces, and we also see, just more recently, 200 million for truck parking included in a House appropriations bill.
Mhm.
Lisa, I know there's a lot of different moving pieces here, but what's your reaction to, in general, to recent legislation and funding aimed at increasing the availability of truck parking?
We've been supportive of that for many years, and we have worked very closely with ATA and the Owner Operator Independent Drivers Association, and in encouraging lawmakers to advance those types of bills. We definitely support those. I think the one that is most recent is the Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act, and that would prioritize grant applications that demonstrate a partnership with our industry, because
Yeah,
the truck stop industry does provide about 90% of the available truck parking, and we can build it faster and cheaper than government can. And so we think that that's a really positive thing. But we'll continue to work to advance bills like this that want to invest in parking.
great. So apart from parking, we spent a lot of time on that topic. I think there's a lot more, I'm sure, to dig into your ride along with Jennifer. So I'm kind of interested just to hear a little bit more about her experiences. Another pain point we often hear about from drivers are, of course, just sharing the road with motorists who today are too often distracted by their phones or just driving aggressively. Just it's tough out there, especially in a congested area. Um, People who maybe just don't appreciate the stopping distance required for a Class 8 truck, or they cut in. A lot
Definitely.
of unsafe practices out there. And then, of course, when they reach their destination, sometimes drivers have to wait for an extended period of time at shippers and receivers' facilities to unload and get back on the road. So it really hurts their productivity and adds to the stress and challenges for that drivers experience in their lives. So aside from parking, what were some of the other challenges that you saw during your ride along with Jennifer? Whether it's
Well, I mean, the biggest thing was just traffic. There was a lot of traffic, and of course, Jennifer was running some, around really busy areas like Chicago, for
yeah,
example. So, some of that is understandable. But the other issue was just the cars, like you said, cutting off the trucks, not understanding, of course, that it takes a lot longer for a truck to stop, than it does for a car. Jennifer was very patient. I think you definitely need a higher level patience to be a truck driver with some of these cars, but, she was able to, see because of the technology in her truck, there was any problem. But there were several times where drivers would do things, and I'm talking about four-wheel drivers, would do things that were completely unsafe. Um, one of the things that she does is she exercises a lot on her truck. She uses her truck to do exercises, and I cannot even explain to you how that is done, but there's a whole, series of exercises that she can do, just using the truck itself. And then one of the other things she really looks for when she stops is a dog run for her dog.
Yeah.
And, so that's something that is really very appealing to her, is to find a place like that.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of waiting, yes, we did a lot of waiting. I was kind of mystified sometimes because she did have appointments and she was prompt. And sometimes, we did just sit and wait and wait. And she did not comment on that. And I would ask her, is this typical? Oh, yes, it's typical.
Yeah.
And one time we went into a facility and she went inside to find out where she needed to drop a particular load and pick another up. And the person inside told her that she was getting ready to take a 30-minute break, and they all had to take a 30-minute break. So we had to wait until her 30-minute break for her to tell Jennifer where she needed to go. And it took 30 seconds for her to find out where she needed to go. So just things like that were constantly happening that week. I was surprised about all of those things, even though, I've heard many times that the drivers wait quite a lot. I didn't, realize until I was actually doing it, how difficult that would be for anybody. She was very patient and didn't seem like it was a big deal, but it was kind of driving me crazy.
Yeah, yeah. I think patience is certainly a virtue for a professional driver, both on the road and also when you get to your destination have to unload. It's
Yeah.
you know, but that being said, it probably shouldn't require that much patience, right? I mean, people in general, the public, the motoring public, should be better drivers, and shippers and receivers should be better about keeping appointments and getting drivers on their way. But fortunately, it's not the world we live in. So patience is
Yes.
really a top virtue for that profession.
And it's easy to say that there were, a lot of drivers out there that were driving in a way that wasn't, very safe. But there were also a lot of truck drivers that I noticed that were, being very cautious, and also, allowing other drivers, other truck drivers to get in front of them and to do things that were just showed sort of, consideration for their fellow drivers. So that was very nice to see too.
Yeah, for sure. Another you mentioned some of Jennifer's preferences. Finding a place to take the dog out and exercise the dog, but of course, drivers usually do have their either the favorite truck stop locations, maybe preferred restaurants or amenities when they're out on the road. So maybe just talk a little bit more about Jennifer's top priorities and preferences when she's deciding, okay, what truck stop am I stopping at? Obviously sometimes it's an agreement that your motor carrier has with a certain chain, but what was she looking for when she was deciding where to park and where to stop?
Well, one of the times that we were out, she noticed that there was some sort of sound that she didn't like coming from the tire. And so we were able to stop at a facility, for them to check the tire. And she said that she really prefers this facility because they treat her like a professional. And she said, it's nice to go into a facility and have them ask her, what do you think is wrong here? And that they respect her position as a professional driver and don't just see her as a woman. So that was eye opening for me, that is not something that she expects, or anticipates receiving that kind of respect. But everywhere we went, I felt like the truck stop employees that greeted her, that that talk to her, and she has dedicated routes, so she
Yeah.
often stops at these places. They knew her by name. It was nice to see that there was a lot of friendliness and good customer service while we were out. She looks for places, obviously, where she can park her truck safely, and I the issue with how to back into a truck parking space, making sure that it's a place where you're able to do that without worrying about hitting somebody else, or hitting another truck, certainly, or God forbid, another person. So that was an issue. But while we were out, she did cook in her truck, and so she was also looking for places that would have groceries that she could purchase. Again, a surprise to me, but that a lot of the drivers are actually cooking in their trucks, and so she's looking for certain things that she wants to make in her own truck, that kind of thing.
No, that's helpful and I think insightful too. The broader population of drivers, what they might be interested in their preferences when they're out on the road. But one area that I think we've seen become more of a focus across the trucking industry, at least at a good number of trucking companies, is driver wellness, right? And that's a comprehensive view on wellness, but part of that, of course, is your health, your diet. What are you eating out on the road? So maybe just take a moment to speak to how truck stops have begun offering some healthier food options. We've seen more healthy food options that have come online at more locations to support drivers who are really focused on their health when they're out on the road. Because of course you spend many hours sitting in your truck.
Mhm.
It can be kind of sedentary. So there are, if you're watching your health, you want to look for places to exercise, but also places to eat healthy when you're not working from home.
Yes, I noticed that there's a lot of fresh produce now at truck stops. So, fruit certainly, but also prepared salads that the truck stops are actually preparing themselves, and just a more variety of food options. So I ate every meal except for the one meal that Jennifer cooked in her truck, and she typically does eat more in her truck than we certainly did, but I wanted to get out and experience that, and I was pleasantly surprised at the variety of foods that are now being offered that I think maybe 10 or 15 years ago just wasn't the case. There's certainly fewer sit-down full-service restaurants, but we did see those as well, and, so I was happily surprised to find that there were, options, and I think that having more groceries, having more things that are fresh, whole foods, at truck stops is certainly the trend, and I think one that we'll see continue.
Yeah. Uh, and no, I'm one to order the barbecue bacon cheeseburger when I'm traveling for work and suspend all thoughts of health. So, but when you do it for a living, right? When you're traveling for you're on the road for a living,
Right.
that exception becomes the norm. So having those healthy options is very important, and it's good to see that that's become also more of a priority among leadership at trucking companies as well.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, Jennifer said that the truck and the truck stop together are her home. And so, you don't eat like that. You may eat like that on vacation, right? Like where you're eating the double bacon cheeseburger. But if it's your daily life, you want to make better choices. So, and she's definitely trying to do that.
And shifting gears here just a little bit, I also want to think about the future of trucking equipment here. So just recently, in the last few years, we've seen the emergence of this first wave of battery electric trucks.
Hmm.
Now, today, this is there's a tiny sliver of the trucks that are on the road today, but and of course, battery electric, the technology is being used mostly in return to base operations. And so
Hmm.
these are trucks that are going to recharge at the terminal, at their home terminal or depot at the end of the shift, just kind of return back to the terminal for local and short haul operations. But if you project forward and you see a day when electric trucks are going to become a much bigger part of the industry at some point in the future, they're going to need a lot more charging infrastructure to support them. And you would think that that would align over time, of course, with truck stops, at least in certain markets, certain locations where there's a lot of density near ports, for example.
Hmm.
Um, so, do you see EV charging lanes eventually becoming somewhat common, or at least at some truck stops? And if so, when do you envision that starting to really ramp up?
So, I mean, our members are making investments right now in electric vehicle charging stations. The National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Grants, the NEVI grants, about half or maybe more than half of those now have been awarded to truck stops and other fuel retailers. So it's definitely happening. However, electrifying a commercial truck fleet is a much more complicated scenario, and it's just going to take a lot longer. It's very, very expensive. Um, you know, the timetable that has been put forth by EPA for heavy trucks, for electrifying the heavy truck fleet, is just not workable. We're part of the Clean Freight Coalition along with ATA, and we're trying to advocate for a much more realistic time frame. We had a study commissioned by Roland Berger that found that the price of electrifying the full commercial fleet is going to be about $1 trillion just in infrastructure investments. That is a lot of money. There's a lot of things that we have to do in order to be able to make it happen. We have the power grid, obviously, that's aging that we need to upgrade. We have, serious issues with um, how much electricity has to be generated just to,
Right.
to support this infrastructure. So there's a lot of issues that still need to be worked out. But we always say that we will provide whatever our customers need to fuel their trucks or cars or whatever. If it's renewable diesel, if it's biodiesel, if it's electricity, if it's peanut butter, we are ready to put it in if that's what the drivers want and need.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good segue because there are, of course, lots of other alternatives, powertrain technologies, alternative fuels that in some cases have been seeing some adoption. Other cases are maybe looking out to the near or medium term future. So again, you go beyond, of course, diesel that dominates the industry today, battery electric that's just beginning to enter. We've also had natural gas on the market for a while,
Right.
and that's perhaps going through a bit of a resurgence or a new sort of a second wave of energy going into natural gas. A lot of that is interest around renewable natural gas as well. You have hydrogen fuel cell as another zero emission technology that can be basically parallel with battery electric, but uses hydrogen rather than large expensive batteries to power the electric powertrain. And then hydrogen is also being explored as a fuel for a combustion engine, right? So we could have hydrogen combustion as well. Lots of different investments across the board from the truck manufacturers. Uh, we see a lot of fleet pilots. Some of the larger fleets are testing various fuels, have been for years. So really a lot of possibilities. We see an industry is shifting from almost entirely diesel to one that's going to have multiple different fueling options. And of course, that's a more potentially complex environment, right? At a fueling location where it's not just diesel all day, every day. So your thoughts on how, maybe we could see more of these types of alternative fuels being dispensed at more truck stops in the future and in higher volumes. Is that what you see happening in the years ahead?
Yes, I do. And you mentioned hydrogen. I think that's, for example, a very promising clean energy source. Um, it's going to be a very similar refueling experience as what you see with diesel trucks. It takes about 10 to 12 minutes, but the production and distribution costs for hydrogen are significantly more expensive, and that is slowing the adoption of the hydrogen into our infrastructure. I think we need more innovation and investment in order to make it economically viable. But I do think that that is a solution that we will be looking at very closely in the years to come. Renewable and biodiesel are really the most commercially viable solutions that we have right now. And something that we've been saying over and over again is that while we're trying to get these other technologies right, looking more at hydrogen, looking more at electricity, we need to do everything we can right now with the technology that currently exists, to make sure that we're, making progress towards our clean fuel goals. So, since 2004, we've had a biodiesel tax credit that has incentivized fuel retailers to make investments in biodiesel blending. And so a lot of biodiesel is now in the fuel supply system. So, we've really increased the number of gallons. I think in 2005, it was about 4 billion gallons in the supply, and now it's about 100 million or 100 billion. So it's a lot more of our fuel supply is. I'm sorry, I had that number wrong. It's 4 billion gallons now, and 100 million gallons back in 2005. Sorry about that. So we really have made a lot of progress in reducing truck emissions through this program. So we need to make sure that we are paying attention to the short-term gains we could be making, while we're still trying to, have these more aspirational goals that will take longer.
Yeah, there's a lot you can do today with today's technology, today's engines to
Yeah.
operate in a more efficient way and in a way that releases fewer emissions in the atmosphere. But I know we're winding down on time here, and I appreciate all this conversation and going a bit long here, but I don't want to let you go until I hear your thoughts on the future of truck stops and travel centers. So how do you see truck stops changing in the future? And how can they better serve that next generation of drivers, right? Maybe drivers who are just entering the industry today and will be moving it forward in the decades ahead. Your thoughts on what the truck stop of the future will look like, say a decade and beyond.
I think you'll see that we'll continue, as you alluded to have more types of fuels available for different types of trucks. And I think that, the market, the industry is expanding. So we're seeing a lot of convenience store operators now getting into the business of travel centers. I think that, in terms of the next generation of drivers, I see all the time the new products that are coming online at truck stops, that serve different demographics. For example, we see a lot of Eastern European drivers now, and at our member locations, there's a lot of food options and beverage options that are catered specifically to that type of driver. So I think in the future, we'll see a lot of different types of fueling options, and hopefully we'll find more parking for trucks.
Yeah. Well, that's a great comment there, and great food for thought as we think about the future. But before I let you go, Lisa, any final thoughts you'd like to share with us, either about truck parking or about the nation's truck stops?
I think that it would be great if more people could do the ride-alongs like I did and experience, what it's like for a driver. I was only with Jennifer for about a 5-day period, but I was able to see, the professionalism, the camaraderie with other drivers, certainly, and the things that she relies on truck stops to provide to her, so that she can then in turn deliver things that everybody needs in America. So I think it would be a useful exercise if people in the industry haven't done that, to certainly get out there and do it. It was well worth my time, and I hope to do it again someday.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that experience with us. Sort of secondhand with us. We appreciate hearing your experiences and what you learned from that experience. And again, this has been a great conversation about parking and many other topics here. This
Mhm.
has this 45 minutes or so. But I do see we're out of time, so we'll leave it there. Thank you again, Lisa, for joining
Thank
the
you,
program
Seth.
and sharing your insights. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us today. For more information on future episodes, visit ttnews.com. This has been Transport Topics Newsmakers.